この戦争をどう思うか。
Thank you very much. はい、浜田さん。
Campaign gather all of these people that are against nuclear weapons, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, really these people that know more than anyone what nuclear weapons.
I'm a second-generation nuclear test survivor.
Vienna has always been a very important city for negotiations, especially in the nuclear field. We have the Iran talks taking place in Vienna, the Vienna summit. I feel that Vienna, also as being headquarters of the United Nations, is playing a crucial role in providing the ground for such talks.
So those final ratifications in the middle of a massive global pandemic, the UN was mostly shut down. Donald Trump was still president of the United States. But we did it. The ban entered into force and we immediately started planning for this massive celebration at the first meeting of states parties. And then things, believe it or not, got worse. Russia illegally invaded Ukraine earlier this year and threatened to use nuclear weapons. And our work became more urgent, more needed than ever.
So my appeal to you is simple. Keep up your efforts. We need you, your voices, your campaigns, your pressure. We need this effective and powerful private-public partnership.
Whenever I travel to the areas next to the former Soviet nuclear testing site in Semipalatinsk, I meet the third and the fourth generation of survivors, children who are missing fingers, who suffer from cancer and other diseases.
原爆は人間として死ぬことも人間らしく生きることも許さない人間と共存できない非人道的絶対悪の兵器であることを明らかにしました。
I'm from Britain, and what can the UK do to help survivors from places like Japan?
As you know, at the basis of your ideology, religion, faith-based way of life, Doku, may that be in Japan, Russia, South America, or the Middle East. It has to be a united front, that our humanity is what makes us united. And if we can do it as an Israeli and Iranian, amongst a lot of friends who are helping us achieve this goal, you can do it anywhere in the world. Thank you.
Would it be rational for the other country to use nuclear weapons back and start nuclear war?
私たち唯一の戦争被爆国である日本の若者たちの思いを発信したり、世界中の人たちと一緒に協力して核兵器廃絶へ向かっていったりということができたらいいなと思います。
Our member churches have been at the forefront.
I was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 2014, and that, of course, is something that leaves an extremely profound impact.
条約は被爆者の願いそのものです。
The treaty embodies this very aspiration of we Hibakusha.
締約国会議の成功を心から願っております。
If my grandmother had not been evacuated at that time, if she had been more affected by radiation and died soon after the bombing, I would not be here today.
Are mostly sent off island to other countries for cancer treatment. Others are left untreated or undiagnosed until they find themselves in the late stages of their diseases and their life.
The impact of the nuclear bomb on healthcare workers was shocking. 90% of the doctors were killed or injured, as were 92% of the nurses and 80% of the pharmacists. There was a desperate need for blood, but there was no possibility of blood transfusions, as most potential donors were either dead or injured.
Sanitation and infrastructure, logistics as well. Inside the blast zone, roads, rail links, and tunnels will be impassable.
Where are the Stanislav Petrovs, the Gervais Cowles, the Vasily Archipovs, and the Leonid Peruts today? We actually, the thing that dominates in this equation in a crisis is uncertainty. It's unknown what the probabilities are.
Girls in this youngest age group were twice as likely to get cancer at some point in the next 60 years than were boys.
Now, in all of that, I think the humanitarian approaches actually do help enormously. I already mentioned earlier today the history of humanitarian approaches that made an enormous impact in overall disarmament efforts.
Armament education to raise the public's awareness of your valuable input as to how best to continue raising awareness about the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons in a most effective manner. Thank you so much.
We need to educate younger people especially, also educate, provide opportunities for diplomats who will be negotiating various agreements at international multilateral platforms. I would also add that it needs to be firmly linked up with youth engagement and empowerment activities. I think one important element that we see in the disarmament sphere is that how civil society activists moves the file so much. The energy, the voices that civil society people, especially younger people, can bring will give new, innovative, creative forces for disarmament.
And in the afternoon, we will look at some of the more recent developments and recent research.
20 million killed in World War I and 60 million in World War II, mankind showed it could mass produce death.
On the environment, on the health, and on our communities. And I think a lot of these themes have already featured quite prominently this morning, and I'm excited to continue the conversation with our great panel we have here this afternoon.
By all other nuclear weapon states, we want small weapons that probably we can use, that might be more usable than the other weapons we have in our arsenal. So in my research I was wondering, what is it about these small nuclear weapons? What is it that these are all talking about? The conclusion basically is there are no small nuclear weapons.
The millions of tons of smoke produced in the region spreads around the globe within days and covers most of the globe within a few weeks, following the same mechanism that would produce a nuclear winter after a larger nuclear war.
The study estimates that global food reserves would be exhausted within a few years and that trade would cease. And the combined effect of this and the climatic change mean that 3.7 billion people would suffer a staple crop reduction of more than 10%, and 600 million people suffer a staple crop reduction of more than 30%, and many of them located in the global south. The issue of global food insecurity is one that is certainly predominating discussions now. The war in Ukraine has amplified those narratives, and certainly the implications for the humanitarian implications are paramount.
Altogether, weapon states conducted more than 2,000 nuclear weapon tests, most of them fortunately underground, but more than 500 were atmospheric tests. And many communities worldwide were directly affected by these tests, and you can see them on this map, so I won't
read them all, but highlight perhaps a few. There's Algeria, Australia, Kazakhstan, and especially, of course, communities in the Pacific.
Here today has been a topic of discussion in the media for the last months, and there's a new attention to it. However, the media don't want to take the time or have the time. So I ask you, maybe in your closing remarks, what's your soundbite?
I think it's fair to say that the era we have known since the end of the Cold War of significant reductions of nuclear weapons and the role they play is over.
There are lots of plausible ways that things could go bad, that nuclear weapons use could happen. Understanding how those evolve and what their impacts would be is the first step to figuring out how to stop them before they happen.
And what we certainly do not know, and we may never understand, is the human condition in the nuclear age, because we are not who we were. And so what we have to figure out is what is it we need to become.
Assistance and in particular environmental remediation is a complex problem that will truly take time. So I'm just wondering what you all would think about a timeline, and if a timeline, whether something like 2045 would make sense in your opinion.
Diana's eager to take on the first question, so I'll let you do that before Tony tells us.
Well, about timelines. My timeline is we need to achieve one without corruption.
On the end approach, based on scientific results and the involvement of civil society, academia, and affected communities, in particular the Hibakusha and the victims of nuclear testing, can render an open, meaningful disarmament debate leading to concrete results.
And just as we also heard today at the Humanitarian Impacts of Nuclear Weapons Conference, disproportionate impacts on women and girls because of our biology, and from a third generation Hibakusha from Japan, whose grandmother was contaminated by those horrendous bombings. But we moved in the weekend from the horror of what happened that reminds us that it is an imperative to stigmatize and ban and eliminate nuclear weapons. And because we now have the Nuclear Ban Treaty, it's an imperative to implement the Tpnw.
Ladies and gentlemen, I declare open the first meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
Virtually all indicators for nuclear weapons are pointing in the wrong direction, except our treaty. It is a ray of hope for the international community against an otherwise very dire and dangerous backdrop. This is what makes the Tpnw so important, and this is what makes the Tpnw so precious, especially right now.
Today, the terrifying lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are fading from memory. The once unthinkable prospect of nuclear conflict is now back within the realm of possibility. More than 13,000 nuclear weapons are being held in arsenals across the globe. In a world rife with geopolitical tensions and mistrust, this is a recipe for annihilation. We cannot allow the nuclear weapons wielded by a handful of states to jeopardize all life on our planet. Let's eliminate these weapons before they eliminate us. Thank you.
Today is a historic moment, and I'm deeply honored and humbled to address you. We have gathered here to put into effect the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and to shape the future of nuclear disarmament. A decade ago, this may have seemed illusory. Today, a global, unequivocal, comprehensive prohibition of nuclear weapons, the most catastrophic weapons ever created, is a reality.
With the entry into force of this treaty in January 2021, the legal gap was filled. Nuclear weapons are now comprehensively prohibited under international law, as other weapons of mass destruction have been for decades.
This is an extraordinary and transformative achievement. On behalf of Ican and our 635 partner organizations, I would like to express our profound gratitude to all the states parties, the signatures, and all the other governments that worked with such determination to bring this treaty into being. So while we join you in celebrating this moment, there is no time to be lost. What we have prohibited, we must now work to eliminate. And as we cooperated to make the treaty, we must now work together to implement it. With determination and energy, during this meeting, in the months and the years ahead, we in civil society will work with you to implement your national obligations and to develop the mechanisms for assisting survivors of the use or testing of nuclear weapons and for remediating environmental contamination.
Я очень рад сегодня видеть своих друзей, которые вместе идут, которые продолжают борьбу. Естественно, наша главная цель – это полное уничтожение ядерного оружия. Thank you very much.
The 9 nuclear nations are projected to spend more than $100 billion every year to maintain their nuclear arsenals. Did I remind everyone? Anyone, ladies and gentlemen, that is the sum of finance developed nations pledge and then fail to deliver to climate vulnerable nations by 2020. Every dollar we spend on these missiles instead of seawalls, resilient crops, relocations and renewables is a moral aberration, a failure of the most basic choice between life or death.
Kazakhstan's decision to join the treaty was not only politically driven, but also guided by our long-standing commitment to nuclear disarmament. According to the President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, achieving of the nuclear weapon-free world has become an essential part of the nationwide identity of Kazakh people, giving us the moral right to be at the forefront of global movement to eliminate nuclear weapons. We draw strength from the humanitarian obligation which we owe the past generations who suffered from the destructive legacy of the Soviet nuclear weapons program.
We must counter the narrative that any possession of nuclear weapons is legitimate. They are unacceptable because of the humanitarian risks and consequences. As former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan put it once, there are no right hands that can handle the wrong weapons.
Nuclear weapons are a costly and dangerous liability. They represent a risk multiplier that provides only an illusion of peace of sorts. Here, I wish to reaffirm that the use of nuclear weapons, as well as their mere possession, is immoral.
Мы жили в маленьком домике, и мы чувствовали, когда вот шла вот эта взрывная волна по земле.
Yes, I was born in a small village, and we felt this explosion wave when the explosion was actually done. And I was a young kid, and I felt this nuclear wave coming.
Потому что там был город Курчатов.
Because there was a city Kurchatov.
Это закрытый город.
That was a closed city.
И там были поставки, прямые поставки с Москвы.
And there were like direct transits from Moscow.
Okay. Это было очень много, и мы видели. Я говорю, что пострадали не только люди, но и пострадали животный мир.
Not only human being suffered from this nuclear testing, but also all the flora and fauna, and as you said, some animals and birds.
Очень много рождалось и козлята, телята, 6 ногами, с 2 головами.
And I remember there were a lot of animals, goats and cows who were born with like 6 legs or some other sequences.
But I'll make sure I email you. Thank you so much.
Kazakhstan and Kiribati have proposed to emphasize the importance
of promoting and implementing Articles 6 and 7 of the Tpnw. Therefore, jointly with experts and civil society, prepared a working paper as a substantive part of the meeting's outcome.
Our tragedy. Explosions that left non-healing wounds on the soil of Kazakhstan. 4 decades of testing took a devastating toll on human health, the environment, flora and fauna, which may take thousands of years to recover. Our choice, 1989. The anti-nuclear movement Nevada Semipalatinsk begins with protests, marches for peace and rallies for a total ban on nuclear tests. 1991. The first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, made a final decision which put an end to the sufferings of Kazakhstan's people and closed the site. Our recognition. In 2006, as a result of a thorough and meticulous work of 5 Central Asian states, in September 2006, in the city of Semipalatinsk, the Treaty on a Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone in Central Asia was signed. In 2009, approving the proposal of Kazakhstan, the United Nations General Assembly declared August the 29th as the International Day Against Nuclear Tests. Our initiatives. 2020, at the UN General Assembly, President of Kazakhstan Kassym-Jomart Tokayev urges all P5 countries to ratify the respective protocols to the Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone treaties, including Semipalatinsk Treaty. Our mission. Since 1991 and well into the future, we dream to leave our descendants a safe and nuclear weapons-free world.
Kazakhstan and Kiribati, both affected deeply by nuclear testing, have submitted working papers on victim assistance and environmental remediation. I believe that Articles 6 and 7 of Tpnw represent the universal value of this treaty.
In fact, we all know, I would love to hear from anyone from any country in the world who says that their language doesn't use the word bikini for a swimsuit. And the reason is that the French designer who designed this swimsuit wanted their design to be explosive. It was not about a beautiful tropical island, it was about atomic weapons.
При этом больничных коек в Севастополе было от силы 15-20.
При таком раскладе стоимость данной процедуры будет весьма существенна, и просто у меня не будет финансовых средств. Спасибо.
Nursultan Nazarbayev, first president of Kazakhstan, made the only possible right decision to close Semipalatinsk test site. In general, we have a 16 stations which ensure round-the-clock monitoring, registering over 11,000 seismic events every year.
A new report that was released last week on environmental remediation, a prior report on victim assistance, and also a fact sheet that boils our principles and both sets down.
It is only through dialogue with survivors that the international community can truly understand how to help those who have suffered from the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons.
And I also wanted to remind delegations that the list of speakers is now closed.
Let us move forward in the same spirit of solidarity and concern for life and the future of our planet. May succeeding generations be saved not only from the scourge of war, as boldly declared in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations, but also from the unspeakable horrors of nuclear weapons in the interest of common security, peace and sustainable development for all humanity.